Welcome in, special live stream, instant reaction style by Jack Del Rio. It was a lovely 4 years. No, it really wasn't. It was a roller coaster ride to relive it and talk about how we wound up here. Sam Fortier, Washington Post, joins me, Craig Hoffman. If you're just finding this YouTube stream, this is new. You're like, oh, someone's talking about Jack Del Rio on this Black Friday. We do a radio show every day, 4 to 7. Well, I do. Sam writes in the Washington Post. Hopefully you know that. You can read it at WashingtonPost.com/sports. So 45-10 yesterday, Sam, is the icing on the cake. At the end of the day, like, why do you think Rivera waited to do this now versus, like, because to me, it's like, okay, there's nothing left to save for this season. What if you had done this after the Bears game? Is it just it became untenable to go to work every day? Like, what was the breaking point?
To me, the breaking point was losing to two division rivals, one of whom was starting an undrafted rookie third-string quarterback, and not solving defensive problems, not maximizing your defensive personnel. I mean, he's given up explosive. His defenses have given up explosive plays for years. It's obviously been worse this year. They didn't make the midseason turnaround that they usually make. And I think that Ron wanted to give his guy a chance. This is a guy that Ron brought in, stuck by through some, comments that he made about January 6th. He's stayed with him even when, Jack couldn't find a scheme to maximize a high-priced free agent in William Jackson. There's been a lot of problems, a lot of misses, even though Jack, I think, has had the defense playing really well at times over the last 4 years. But when you put those two games together and it, closes the book on your competitive season, you have to do something. And there wasn't, I think, an easy coaching change here. For Harris to fire Rivera, I don't think, that would have been the answer. I think that Ron taking over as play caller is not a slam dunk. It's not going to improve you, probably, right, in the same way firing Brent Wieselmeyer is not going to improve you. So I think it was an imperfect but necessary decision at this point.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, right? Because as you mentioned, Ron is now taking over your defensive play calling. I thought it was interesting and correct when he's like, "Yeah, we're gonna have to scale things back." And I think that's both for Ron and for the players. Like, one point that I've made to people when they've talked about firing Jack in season in the past is Ron taking over isn't as simple as he just picks up the playbook and calls different plays. This is not the defense that he used to call. He's never called this defense before. This is Jack's scheme. Now, if you're a head coach and you're competent and you've been around it for 4 years and you were a former defensive coordinator yourself, I hope you can call at least some of it by this point. And that is certainly what Ron's going to do. But it sounds like they're also going to majorly simplify the scheme. And it just kind of makes me wonder again, like, if this is something that was on the table, none of the people that are going to pick it up now haven't been here. And I think that's frustrating because they've been looking for answers all year. And so in a way, if it works, if they play better these 4 games, it's almost all the more frustrating because these solutions were available all along.
The idea of simplifying the scheme is interesting to me because after the Giants game in particular, you talk to Benjamin St. Juste, you talk to Emmanuel Forbes, and they talk about how complex the scheme is and how sometimes that leads to miscommunications in the back end. Then my colleague Tremel Rags talked to Isaiah Hodgins, the Giants receiver, and he was like, yeah, their scheme's pretty simple. We knew how to beat it, especially when they played a lot more man-to-man coverage to try to beat Tommy DeVito, a young, inexperienced quarterback. They, went back to more zone-heavy schemes against Dak, a veteran. But when we talk about, like, simplifying the scheme, I know what we're talking about here, but I really don't know if it matters. You just need to produce better results.
Yeah, it's so funny. That quote just brought back something that Logan and I talked about on Take Command last year, which is that all these comments start to come out about this defense. And I was like, it seems like it's complicated for us, easy for them. And that is the worst possible combination of something. Like, you want, as an offense, right? You want your offense to look really complicated. We have motions, we have shifts, we have funky formations, but we know what we're doing, so it's super easy. Complex for them, easy for us. Same thing on defense. Looks really complex. Oh my God, is it cover 2? Is it cover 6? Is it cover 3? But we know what we're doing. It's simple for us. And it seemed like offenses are able to look at this scheme most of the last 4 years. There's been obviously stretches where it's been very, very good, but all in all, offenses have seen straight through the disguises, straight through whatever complications there have been. It's simple to attack, and there has never been a consistent cohesion of execution on the Commander side of it, which is why they're now literally the worst defense in the league.
I've been thinking a lot over the last couple of days about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers upset in 2021 when that defense legitimately confused Tom Brady with its rotations. And, William Jackson had a pick in that game. And it just, to me, like, if you crystallize all of the things, and obviously they play complementary football and they had that a 10-minute drive to seal it at the end where Antonio Gibson is just doing like battering ram running back carries. Like, that to me is maybe like a high point in terms of what this football team has been under Ron Rivera. And I think particularly for the defense to go out and confuse a Hall of Famer who, like, he wins with his mind.
He never gets confused, ever.
Exactly. Why was it impossible to make that consistent? And I don't know if there's one answer. I don't know if Jack would have an answer. I don't know if any players would have an answer. But, like, when you see a high that high, and then you see a low as we're seeing right now, like, how,
Well, that's what I wanted to ask is, like, they were able to turn this around mid-year multiple years. And I think that probably saves Jack after the Bears game, right? To answer my own question from earlier. Why doesn't he do that after the Bears game? Well, because every other year there's been a turnaround and they've played like a top 5 unit for the back halves of multiple years here. And Ron's probably like, well, it really is unfortunate that we did this terrible start thing again, but he'll figure it out. Why didn't they turn it around this past year? And I think, by the way, the answer is the other guy who got fired today is not as good as the guy that he replaced. Brett Visselmeyer, the defensive backs coach, also gets fired today. And Chris Harris is the guy they should have kept all along. Like, I think you watch how the DBs progress this year. You watch not just progress, because that's not actually the right word. You watch how the defensive backs regress this year. Cam Curl this year is not as good as he was last year. BSJ, not as good as he was last year. Kendall's about the same guy, but he's got a lot more football underneath him in terms of a resume. And then, by the way, you complicate this or compound this by using your first 2 draft picks on defensive backs at a position that is terribly coached all year long. And to me, like, that's the difference in the previous years, is they were able to figure out a coverage structure that worked for them. And there was like a game and a half this year where they started playing a lot more 2 and it started to work. Teams figured it out. They never adjusted again. And it's been, barbecue chicken, if you will, to borrow the inside the NBA phrasing ever since.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the thing that's frustrating for a lot of defensive players is that they feel like they've made progress. They've had good practices. And last night I was standing in the depths of AT&T Stadium outside the interview room, and I like down the halls, Brian Mitchell's voice is just like on the team broadcast, just ripping them apart about, I don't want to hear about good practices. I'm tired of this crap on the field, things like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's hard to argue, because we're not out there all the time about, like, hey, defensive backs, like, you are not having the quality of practices that you think you're having, but clearly, like, the results on the field have shown that. And so I think it's really, it's frustrating. Like, why can't guys pass guys off? Like, why can you not communicate in the back end? Why did the zone match scheme switch not work? I mean, it's obviously coaching, detail, players, all of those things. But untangling those, like, messy cord of wires feels impossible at times.
Yeah, I think that's going to take a while, and it's going to take guys talking, which obviously when people get fired, all of a sudden there's no reason to keep secrets. Guys tend to talk. You've been doing this long enough, and look, last year it happened before people got fired. He wrote the story for those that may not remember. Sam wrote the story about Scott Turner that was not great, at least if you're Scott Turner. So who knows what people will be willing to say this week, and obviously moving forward through the bye week and through the rest of the season. Yeah, I actually, that also sparked this other kind of complimentary thought, if you will, because I was having a conversation after last week's game in the locker room with one of the offensive players. And he was just like, man, if you could see us practice, our offense does not look like this. Our offense is so much crisper. We hit big shots. And I was thinking about that conversation like 2 days later, and I was like, well, is that just because you guys get to play your defense in practice? Like, what is, is it just like, whatever the opposite inverse of iron sharpens iron is? Is it just 2 bad units going against each other in practice? And if so, you get this false sense of confidence because you're beating up on each other, and then you have to go face someone else, and lo and behold, you're not that good. And I wonder if that's kind of been where we were the entire year, and you can never know in training camp because you don't get to see it against someone else. And they even did go to Baltimore, and like they looked good against Baltimore. I think that's the thing that's crazy to me is just it never came together this season. They have all the reason that it should, which honestly does give me hope for the future. Like I do think a good coaching staff can come in here and turn this thing, not to mention the draft picks and the cap space pretty quick. But like, I don't know, I guess to like tee up a question for you, do you think the players here are much better than the results? And this is, as you start to untangle the wires, poorly coached team, or did we overrate the talent and the players actually aren't that good and we overrated that in the preseason and that's why they have not met expectations?
Last year, it was pretty clear to me, and I think a lot of people, that the offense did not live up to its potential because of three reasons, right? Play calling, offensive line, quarterback. And I think that you could go into the offseason and say, oh, there are these three things that we need to fix. I don't think it is quite that simple this year, but I do think that, yeah, there is talent on this roster, and you're seeing a lesser than the sum of its parts team right now. I think that you do need to make some changes. You obviously need to add edge rushers. You need to add corners, safety, depending on what happens with Cam Curl. I think on the offense, you got to look at tight end. And obviously the big question is you have to evaluate Sam Howell. And I know that he's shown a lot of promising signs, but if you hire a GM or a coach who doesn't think he's the guy or thinks that they have a good enough draft pick and they feel like Drake May or Caleb Williams or one of these guys is an upgrade, they could go get him. So I think there's a lot of things at play, but I don't look at this roster in the same way that we did at the end of 2019 and said, like, this is a massive rebuild. I think that, like, there are pieces there, especially with the cap space that you have, especially with the draft picks that you're going to have. I see this as a not as complete project as it was when Ron Rivera came on.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of helpful pieces on this roster. The thing that's crazy about the 2019 team and this team is the best players are the same guys. Like, bigger question, why do you think Rivera's never been able to get another superstar or develop another superstar caliber player over his time here? Because it really is John Allen, Daron Payne, and Terry McLaurin, and half jokingly Tress Way.
I mean, like, no, not jokingly, Tress Way. Like, he is one of the best.
He's a punter, but like, he's one of the best players on the team.
Yeah, that's not a joke. I mean, you have to start with the evaluation process, and I think that, like, I would not give Ron a pass, but like drafting Chase Young, to me, even with the Justin Herbert development and the Tua development, like, he had to take Dwayne Haskins as a part of the job, and Chase Young was a generational guy. Like, not making it work with him, I think is a massive franchise-altering whiff. But drafting him, I don't, think it was a mistake on the same par as Jamin or, Emmanuel could end up being. I think that, you've seen a lot of helpful pieces, like they hit on Cam Curl in 2020. They've hit on, I think Derek Forrest, even though, he hasn't been as consistent and he's been injured this year, but like, I think they've added pieces, but why haven't they been able to add superstar talent? I mean, I think a part of it is the Ron Rivera model, I guess you could say, like the path of every year starting slow, midseason surge, either getting into the playoffs and losing or falling short of the playoffs. Like, you have a middling draft pick every year. And I don't think that the evaluation and development pipeline has been up to par.
Yeah. I also just wonder, like, what was Ron thinking on some of this? And I've been thinking about this more too in terms of EB. I know we're straying a little bit from the defense. This is mostly about Del Rio and whatever, but like this all plays into each other. Like, you look at the interior offensive line of Kansas City, like, they're really good. Their guards are good. Creed Humphrey's one of the better centers in the league. Andy's always had good O-lines going back to his days in Philly. That offense works at its best when you have a really good interior O-line, and you would think that would have been an even bigger point of emphasis with Sam at quarterback. And by the same token, to bring it back to the defense, like, Ron was good when he was good in Carolina, and people know at this point, like, he actually wasn't that good in Carolina. He had 3 winning seasons. But, like, when they were good, and defensively they were good for a long stretch, but he had maybe the best middle linebacker ever. Like, he had Luke Kuechly, and he had obviously the really good players up front, but that defense worked because they had studs in the back seven as well. Josh Norman at the peak of his powers at corner. They had Bradbury, who was really good. But Luke in the middle was the guy who made everything work. And here it's been kind of, the Cole Holcombs, and Cole's like a fine football player, but he's not anywhere remotely close to Luke Kuechly. Cody Barton, obviously, they bring in. And, if they thought Jamin was going to be that guy, like, that's just a heinous evaluation of who Jamin Davis is. Jamin could have been like the Thomas Davis type or the Shaq Thompson type, but he wasn't Luke Kuechly. And, your first round pick, that's a big, big ask. So I also just wonder, like, philosophically, it seems like there's some places where they didn't invest in a major way, or they did and they missed. Corner William Jackson is a big miss. And I wonder how much that obviously plays into it as well. Is like they tried in the wrong places, they didn't spend on the right things, and when they did spend, they actually weren't very good at picking the right things off the shelf, if you will. Anyway,
I feel like this is kind of the part of the conversation where I'm talking about where it's hard to untangle this stuff because if you hit on William Jackson, you have a shutdown corner. Like that year in 2020, they were pretty good down the stretch, except against number one receivers. So it's like, okay, we have to go out and get a guy that can shut down number one receivers. And theoretically, William Jackson was that. He had been that in Cincinnati. And so then, you were unable schematically to maximize his strengths, and you're unable to coach him up and kind of get him to buy in and play with vision through the receiver to the quarterback instead of, locking onto a man. And so then when that sets you back, then you have to start compensating for that. And it just shifts everything around. And kind of with the same thing with Jamin Davis, like you bring that guy in and you're like, even though he only had 1 year, we can coach him up. And so I think it's, it's going to depend on who you talk to in terms of who is the blame on more in terms of, is it an evaluation thing? Is it a developmental thing? Is it a schematic thing? But it's just clear that the front office and the coaching staff have never been on the same page. And if they had been on the same page, then one of their abilities has not been up to snuff to get those guys where they need to go. And so, like, yeah, it's such a cop-out answer to say, like, oh, it's easy to point fingers and blame, but, like, it's really complicated. But I really do believe that. I don't think anyone here I think that there were multiple problems, and that is obscuring, like, what is the thing that like screwed this team? Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, like the simplest way to put it is there's a bunch of people here that aren't that good at their jobs. They're not incompetent. Like they're not professional, but they're just not that good at it. And that's a hard pill to swallow. And by the way, that also means sometimes the professionalism is going to allow you to win some games or show competitiveness in a certain situation, but you're just never going to break through.
I remember I was doing a profile about Marty Herney when they hired him, and I talked to John Lynch. I was doing a profile about Martin Mayhew because he had played with John Lynch when they were together in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And John Lynch made a comment to me, and I'm going to kind of butcher it, but John Lynch basically said, like, I know a lot of people think, like, can it really work with Marty and Ron running it back for a third time? And he said, and I don't know, but I think Martin will be a good addition to that room. He didn't say exactly that, but that was basically his message. And to me, that really speaks to kind of the point you just made. Like, Marty and Ron together, outside of a year where you had the league MVP and a generational middle linebacker, like, this is kind of what they were, and like, so I don't think this comes as a major shock. I think that there were times that, they could have been better, but if you're looking at this and saying, how did Ron Rivera not live up to the 15-1 Carolina Panthers Super Bowl run year? And you just say, like, he never found Cam and he never found Luke.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to put it. All right, last thing, Sam Fortier, again, with us. You can read his work covering all of this. The game yesterday, Del Rio's firing, and what I'm about to ask him about at WashingtonPost.com/sports, which is, where does this team go next? To me, this is kind of like, okay, we got our head on a platter. Let's get to the end of the year, and then everyone's going to be gone, and Josh Harris can finally really start anew. Again, if anybody expected anything differently, they should be mad at the NFL for not pushing Dan Snyder out sooner, because Josh Harris got control of the team the night before training camp started. And to me, by the way, that is an underrated story in this, is like, if the NFL had any chutzpah to push Dan out faster, that would have been great, because they literally just cost Washington the season. There was nothing Harris could do, even if he wanted to. Who knows if he would have, but he didn't have the choice. Anyway, aside from that rant that I've done a couple of times over the last year, where does this team go from here, let's say between now and the end of the season?
they play the games until now. And you look at Sam Howell and you say, are you the guy? And I think it's going to be a good stretch for that, considering the really talented defenses they're going to face. Dallas again, San Francisco, the New York Jets. I mean, they're going to be in a track meet with Miami probably, or they're going to have to throw a lot. So, I mean, this is going to be some really important tape for whoever the next GM is to come in and evaluate. And I think, I don't think it really matters how Ron is as a defensive play caller, but you want to see, like, can Emmanuel finish strong? Can Quan Martin be something? I don't really know what Benjamin St. Juste's role is on this team, but outside corner, I don't know if he has a future there. Can he play nickel? Can Jamin continue to make strides? Is Cam Curl going to flash something that makes you say, hey, do we want to re-sign him? Because I think that, maybe Kendall Fuller is back, but like, there's just, I just think it's a lot about who are the important pieces on this team. Like, who would matter in 2024, no matter who the GM and the head coach are. And Sam Howell is obviously the biggest question mark there, and then everybody else is somewhere behind him.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, Sam Fortier, appreciate your time, sir. Read him, WashingtonPost.com/sports. I'm going to take a quick reset here, break, and then I'll give some thoughts as well before we sign off here on the YouTube stream. All right, welcome back. YouTube stream style. It's kind of the Hoffman show, I guess. Again, if you want Sam Fortier's work, read at WashingtonPost.com/sports. My name is Craig Hoffman. For those of you that are unfamiliar, catching this, new users or new viewers to the YouTube stream on the Team 980, 106.7 Fan. If you're watching this on my YouTube page, I guess you could be new. You could have just found it on the YouTube Discover page, but I'm the guy in the picture. That's me. So subscribe. We do a podcast 3 times a week. It's myself and Logan Paulson, who played 10 years in the NFL. It's called Take Command. Very good stuff. We did one this morning, reacting to the game yesterday. And in it, I said, I'd probably fire Jack Del Rio, but we'll see. And then by the time we hit publish on it, about 5 minutes later, there went Jack Del Rio. Also a radio show daily on the Team 980, which you can listen to nationwide on the free Odyssey app. And of course in the DC area on 980 AM or 106.7 HD2. And then we have a pregame show. That's on 106.7 The Fan and the Team 980. Basically, we're a lot of places. And if you can't find us talking, or me talking about football, then you're not looking very hard. Okay, a couple of thoughts. And then also, I will answer a few questions. So I've got a couple of the comment sections up here in the chat. So go ahead and leave a couple questions or comments, and I'll try to respond to, let's say, somewhere between 3 and 5 before we go. The reason I said that I would fire Del Rio is simple. You can't play like that. You can't have this thing feel inevitable. And that's the way the Cowboys felt yesterday. They fought hard in a ton of games this year. They've kept it competitive. At times, they've been like holding on for dear life, and they needed the offense to just give them a little bit more and a little bit more juice, and the offense would let down at the wrong time. And that was kind of the emotional dam break. And that's kind of what happened the previous week, where they held up really, really well against against New York. And they held up and they held up. In Seattle, this happened to an extent too. And then at the end, it's just like, we can't hold on anymore. And they fall off a cliff. And even to an extent, that's what happened yesterday. Like, they were not good in the first half. You go like punt, touchdown, 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 all the way down. And it's 20-10 at halftime. And then I was expecting them to just not be competitive really in the third quarter. They come out and they pitch a shutout in the third quarter, but the offense gets shut out too. And then it all comes crumbling down. But this is the difference between good and bad teams. It's not like you're bad on every single play. It's that you can't put together 60 minutes or 4 quarters for your unit, however long you're on the field. In the Commanders' case yesterday, like 23 minutes of football, of high quality, good, competitive football. And to me, it came down to what Del Rio and his staff were doing. And you can't fire everyone because someone's got to coach the games the rest of the season. But Visselmeyer was obviously the guy who needed to go on top of Jack, because the defensive backs have regressed this year. The defensive backs have not played well at all. Like, Cam Curl has not been the impact player. Like, he's been fine most of the year, but he hasn't been the impact player. Percy Butler has actually played pretty well the last couple of weeks overall, but once a game, he lets one out. And you're like, well, dude, you're the guy. How do we get that cleaned up? How do we make it so our last line of defense isn't reliably giving up a big play for a touchdown once a game? That's an unacceptable rate for that to happen. So you've got that. St. Juice has not progressed. Forbes has had this pretty terrible rookie year of mixed baggedness. And it just doesn't feel like he's gotten the help or support. And you talk to these guys too. And that's the thing. And, Sam did a good job of referencing some of these conversations. I was there when Benjamin St. Juice made these comments after the New York game where he's like, things would just be easier if this defense was simpler. We have all these rules. And it's like, okay, it's cover 3, but it's not the cover 3 you see on Madden. Now I'm paraphrasing / expanding on what he was saying. When you play Madden and it's cover 3, it's like, okay, you've got this bubble here and you've got this bubble here, and then there's a safety in the middle. That's not how this defense works. You have to work to identify the concept that's coming at you, and then you go match it. So you might leave a vacancy here, even though it's cover 3 and you're a deep third player, because this route does this thing, you have to jump this, and it's a lot to think about. And it's not that hard when you're drawing it up on paper because you draw the X's and the O's. The problem is when you're in a game, you don't know what's coming. So it's like, oh, I have a run responsibility here. If this route happens, I have to do that. If that happens, I have to do this. But if this happens, I have to do that. Okay, I've got everything. Oh, crap, this guy just went in motion. Now I've got to recalculate everything I just did. Oh, the ball's in play. Oh, we just gave up a touchdown. Like, it's a lot. And simplifying down some of these rules will make it easier to pass guys off. Will make it easier to, not have a bust and let a guy leak behind you that you thought you had help on, but you don't. And these are the kinds of things that happened all the time. Way too much thinking, way too much guessing, not enough good playing. And Visselmeyer, I think, replacing Chris Harris was an extreme detriment to that regard. And I think that Del Rio probably could have been way more consistent as a play. Like, one, he hired the staff. 2, he could have been way more consistent as a play caller in terms of making it, hey, we're a little more predictable. And that can be hurtful for an offense because it allows them to get their best routes on, like, their cover 2 beaters if you're playing a bunch of cover 2. But it really is a game of execution. If you execute it right, then you should have solutions. And they couldn't execute things right, and that's ultimately the downfall in the end. And the last couple of years, they figured it out. I also think that, like, the front 7 doesn't need to be forgotten here. The lack of pressure has been bad. Allen and Payne are having their worst years of their career. They've been, again, it's not like they're unplayable. It's not like they're unprofessional. It's not even like they're bad, but they're not the dudes that you're paying them to be. And some of that had to do with what Chase was trying to do. But at the same time, like, they didn't really help Chase or Montez out either. They could have brought a lot more pressure as opposed to relying on those guys. They've called better games, I think, since those guys left because they've been more aggressive with the blitz. But then you don't get pressure if you're not blitzing. And it's just, they've never found ways to do stuff that other teams do on a regular basis. And that's the thing that I think is really frustrating is, like, when I do the podcast with Logan and we do our preview show on typically Fridays, but before the game, and we run through what he sees on tape from other teams, I just constantly find myself asking, why can't we do that? Or why can't the Commanders do that? Why is it that they can't take some of these line stunts and execute them at a high level, or take a pressure that another team executes and time it up right? Like, this stuff happens in the league. Some of it's hard, but this stuff is available in the league. And so it's on whoever the next head coach is to find a DC who can do that stuff and is really solid in it. And I think the biggest thing is this staff did not have good teachers on it. You have to be able to teach players why, and you have to be able to teach all kinds of players. The NFL has, 35 dudes per unit. When you add, like, all the practice squad players in, you're not going to have all auditory learners. And now I'm getting, like, nerdy in terms of how you teach stuff, but, like, I'm a coach. I'm not a football coach, but, like, I'm a performance coach. And these are things I think about because teaching, if you can teach someone something, like, you can kind of teach someone anything as long as you personally understand it, if you're a good teacher. And it comes down to, one, your own understanding of what you're doing. And then can you communicate it to someone who hears or learns by listening, who learns by touching, who learns by doing, who learns by a diagram? Like, you have to be able to teach multiple people. And that's the nature of an NFL locker room. And this team, sure, there's some guys that learn their jobs and were able to progress and do well, and way more who weren't. So I don't even know if they were good at teaching any particular style, any particular player, considering how this defense has played this year. Dead last in points and yards allowed, 30th going into the weekend in DVOA. but it's bad. And that would be my priority for the next head coach, the next OC, the next DC, and their staffs on down. I want guys who not only are good in terms of winning with the pen, creating schematic advantages, making things that are easy for their guys and hard for the opponents, but are good at teaching that so that it really does ultimately come out that way when you move it from the pen to the practice field to the game field. All right, let me try to run through some of these. So Edward Jordan says, when Rivera was a DC in Chicago and San Diego, both teams had top defenses respectively. But here's another interesting thing about kind of where we are with Del Rio and Rivera right now. They didn't run Ron's system here. And so I felt a little weird. I should have brought this up when Sam was on, but like even the Luke Kuechly thing, they didn't run the same system. It's a 4-3, and that's the same, but like you're having the same front is not the same as running the same system. Del Rio ran something different than what Ron ran, and that's part of the reason why I think Ron was letting Jack go as long as he did, because he's like, it's not like I can take this over and I know it inside out. And it's another reason why they're going to pare this down is because Ron's got to get it to a place where he can call it. And so I am very curious what that looks like. But I think that was a mistake from Rivera at go. Like when you were good in Carolina, it was in part because of that defense. 2, you need to be able to have more input as a head coach. And he gave that up systematically when he hired Jack Del Rio. And it kind of worked that first year. They wound up like second, I think, in total defense that first year. But, see where we are now. Let's see. Let's go. I'm going to go over to these comments over here. Carl's going crazy in one of the chats, talking about Sam. Anyone see Howell comparisons to Rex Grossman? Dude is going to have over 20 picks end of season. Unacceptable. I don't care how. He says how will they happened. I think that's a typo. I think it's supposed to say how they happened. One thing that I think that needs to be discussed here is the lack of complementary football. Like Sam Howell leads the NFL in yards and completions as well as interceptions because he leads the NFL in attempts. These are all volume stats. It's not like he's got the highest interception rate in the league. I'd have to look up and see who does. But when you throw it this much, like you're going to throw picks because you're throwing the ball a zillion times a game. And there is just some correlation. And I'm guessing because we have so much history showing the correlation, causation to teams that run the football to being good defenses. And part of it is like shorter games and all that kind of stuff because the clock runs. There's not as many incompletions. There's less plays in the game, so you give up less yardage. But there's a general attitude versus what is going on here that I think when you look at this defense having its worst year under Del Rio, and not that they were awesome every other year. There were some years where they finished pretty well, but we watched those games. We know that for the first half of those seasons, they weren't remotely competitive defensively. The offense bailed them out at times. But when you lead the league in passing attempts, there's clearly some kind of negative impact on your defense. And so this is, again, not to let Del Rio off the hook. I've told you why I think he's done a bad job and deserves to go. But I do think that if I was a head coach, or if I'm Josh Harris moving forward, and I'm talking to Eugene Shen in the analytics department, I want to know, hey, dude, what's our overall football strategy? What is the thing that we want to make sure that a style of play, we're looking for a head coach that believes the same things we do, because this is the best way to win. And I just don't think that, especially with a quarterback that's this young and inexperienced, this is a smart way to go about playing football. And certainly, like, if you got Patrick Mahomes, fine, but with Sam Howell, no. And you see the results. Not only are they 4-8, they're 2-8 in their last 10. They started 2-0, and they could come out of the weekend with the 4th pick in the draft. All right, a couple more. Here's an actual question. Let's go to the Hawk TV says, what's up, Craig? Hope your Thanksgiving was well spent. It was. We had a nice little Friendsgiving. Had great food. My wife crushed the turkey. Great mac and cheese, mashed potatoes, the whole thing. I just had another leftover plate. So that was great. In your opinion, which loss hurt more, 56-14 in 2021 or 45-10 in 2023? Keep in mind that both those losses were dealt to us by the Cowboys. Oh, I remember. I wasn't there, but I do remember. This one hurts way more. That 21 game was the COVID game. I think Garrett Gilbert may have started it, if I'm thinking of the right game. Like, it was a disaster from a roster standpoint before you even started. So this is one where you're just hoping to show some competitiveness, show some fire, show some, show that you like are an actual real NFL football team, and you can't even do that. The embarrassment, like I will say, admittedly, and this is going to make some of you mad, and I don't care. Dak eating a turkey leg was hilarious. And if it was our team doing that, we would have been like, that's the greatest moment ever. And it blows because it happened against us. That was funny, objectively. Subjectively, as someone who wants the Commanders to win, oh, buddy, that's embarrassing. So, yeah, I would say when the starting quarterback on the other team eats turkey leg halfway through the fourth quarter, that's a worse loss. Let's see. Let's go back over to 106.7, the fans chat. What's up over here? Let's see. Do we have anything else? Not really. Mr. Cool, if you guys want to drop a couple of actual questions ending in question marks, that's going to make it easier for me to answer one or two more before we go here. But I'll react to a couple of these comments as well. Mr. Cool says, firing coaches won't do anything. Minuski and Del Rio were coaching a winning Washington team when Alex Smith was the quarterback. Yeah, I mean, that second part doesn't go with the first. The firing coaches now isn't going to do anything because, like, the book has been written. The season is over. Like, you're playing now for draft position. And playing well, might I add, if you're playing for draft position. They could come out, they went into the weekend with pick 7. They could come out with pick 4. Likely will be somewhere in between. It's not good. But to say that, it's all about the quarterback, for instance, like Alex Smith found a way to make it work, and all of a sudden these defensive coordinators, they won games. Like, that's not how it works. Everybody matters in an NFL organization. The coordinators matter, I don't want to say more than the head coach, but I don't know. Logan often is the coordinator is the most important person, which, by the way, I do want to circle back to this in a moment, affects who my next head coach is. But the coordinators are the ones who set the game plan for the week. And the coordinators are the ones who hire the rest of the staff, obviously with heavy input from the head coach, and ultimately come up with this cohesive plan that hopefully the players understand, and the coordinator's ability to get that to the position coaches and to the players through the position coaches. It's what's going to determine your success on that side of the ball. So yeah, coaching matters in the NFL a ton, not to mention a Kyle Shanahan who can really create schematic advantage on paper that translates to the field because you create good angles in the run game, or you create open receivers down the field in the pass game based off of formations, based off of breaking your tendencies, based off subverting expectations, based off of simple alignment. There's just a lot of stuff you can do and move guys around, and I don't think this team did that remotely well. Defensively, for sure, and frankly, I don't think they do it that great offensively, which leads me to this point. A lot of comments in the, on all the streams, on Team 980, on 106.7 The Fan, on my page, are about Sam. And whether it is Sam or someone else, I haven't done enough draft homework yet to have really strong opinions on this. I really like what I see from Sam. I really like his makeup. I would probably move forward with Sam, but let's see where the draft pick is, and let me watch a little tape on these college guys, because I don't watch a ton of college football, admittedly, and we'll go from there. But whoever is your quarterback is going to be a young quarterback, Howell or draft pick, that you hope is here for 10, 15 years. I would like an offensive head coach because of that. Because if you hire a defensive head coach, and we admit that coordinators are super important, what happens if that guy is successful? Let's say you hire Dan Quinn, who would be a very good head coach, and has been a good head coach. But when Dan Quinn had Kyle Shanahan as his OC, he was a Super Bowl coach. He got rid of, or Kyle gets the job in San Francisco. Dan gets fired a couple years later. Dan Quinn was the same guy. And defensively, they were kind of the same defense a lot of that time in Atlanta. But Kyle had the biggest impact because Kyle and Matt Ryan's relationship was incredibly fruitful, and Matt Ryan was the freaking MVP of the league. So if I'm trying to have my quarterback be super successful, I don't want him to lose his coordinator. And if that means hiring an offensive coordinator that, as a head coach, that's super involved, your Ben Johnsons, your Bobby Slowicks, your Brian Johnsons, your whoever around the league that are going to be the hot candidates, that's who I want. Just a note. All right, let me see if I got any actual questions. If not, we're going to get up on out of here. Let's see. People talking about wide receivers. I would love to see what these receivers look like in a more receiver-friendly offense, not one that is so interior-focused. Curtis, great game yesterday and all, but, like, can we get Terry some of those touches? Let's see. Someone saying on the other stream, this is my first year watching Terry. Is Terry an elite receiver? Yes, he is. Like, Terry's really good. He's not Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. He's not the most premier blue chip top level, but he's in the next tier. He's not featured in this offense, and it drives me bananas. Do you believe that trading Young and Sweat has hurt our defense? Yeah, it did to an extent, but it's not like they played well with them. They were bottom of the league with them. They've been bottom of the league without them. And Chase brought some really good things, but Chase also brought some really bad things. He was the best pass rusher they had this year, highest pressure rates, best win rates, all that kind of stuff. He also was out of gap and playing out of scheme. I think the way he played really diminished the efficacy and effectiveness of John Allen. Montez was less of a problem on the other side, but just kind of consistently solid, not someone I would want to have to pay what the Bears just paid him. And so Montez was a good trade based off value. Chase was a good trade based off of the fact that you're not going to re-sign him, and I think they were ready to get rid of him. But I think that's also another point. And I know Linnell brings this up in like a pretty dramatic way all the time on his shows. I don't know that I'm going to go as far as Linnell. I don't know that I can go as far as Linnell. I don't know. Anyway, let's see. Listen, Linnell, you're just nodding along going, yeah. The fact that they can never get Chase to do the things they want is kind of the point, right? Like, as a coach, if you have a scheme that you believe in, you need to find a way to communicate to your players why what you want them to do is important. And if they don't listen to you, you need to have the chutzpah to bench them. Like, you need to take command of, no pun intended, but listen to the Take Command podcast, wherever you get yours. You need to take command of your unit, and you need to establish the power structure and say, like, no, like, I know you're good and you're talented, but if you don't do the things we need you to do, like, someone else will. They'll play. And they never did that with Chase. And that's a huge fundamental flaw in this unit. It's a fundamental flaw of Rivera. It's on Scanina. It's on Jack. It's on everybody. And if there were, and unlike in the past where maybe they were afraid to do that because of Dan, like, Josh Harris wasn't going to have a problem with that. So do your thing, man. Like, go be a coach. And that was definitely a problem. Let's see. We got to get a quality GM, real football person. Yes, they do. That is correct. Unfortunately, all those people are like assistant GMs right now. Let's see. All right. That's going to do it for now. Appreciate everybody checking out this stream on a Black Friday here. I hope all the sales of your dreams were there for you and you spent your money wisely. Other than that, I'll see y'all for the Hoffman Show on Monday. We get started at 4 o'clock, have 10 thoughts from the game. We call it First and 10. Obviously, we'll go a little bit longer on the biggest thoughts, which will include the firing of Jack Del Rio. Other than that, that's all we got. Just take command out now on the game. We'll do our tape review on Tuesday. If you just found this stream, whichever one you are watching, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Hit like so people find this video after we hit end. They can watch it on demand. Thanks again to Sam Fortier from the Washington Post for joining us, and we will see you next time here on YouTube.